The training yard was quiet at that hour, except for 3 sets of footsteps closing in around me. I had been sitting on the low wall near the equipment shed, tightening the strap on my boot, when Threx Vaughn stepped in front of me and blocked the morning light. Behind him stood Dorel Kesh, arms folded, and a younger cadet named Fen Oruk, who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. "You are the one from the sealed world," Threx said. It was not a question. I finished tying my boot before I looked up. "I am the one who is going to be late for morning drills if this takes much longer." Threx smiled, showing the ridged plates along his jaw. Among his people, that expression meant amusement, but it could also mean something closer to hunger. There is time. The bell has not rung. Dorel stepped forward, tapping at a data slate in his hand. "Your combat metrics are the lowest recorded in this cohort. Strength index, reaction speed, bone density, all below cohort average. And yet there are files on your homeworld that even our instructors cannot open. I find that curious." "Curious is one word for it," I said. "We simply want to understand," Dorel continued, in the calm tone of someone who believed he already understood everything. "Humans keep claiming their species survived something terrible. We would like to see what that means, in a controlled setting, nothing more." I looked past him at the empty yard, at the long shadows still stretching across the packed dirt, at the sky just beginning to turn from gray to gold. The bell tower stood at the far end, silent for now. "You want to fight me before class starts," I said, "because a chart told you I should lose." "We want to test you," Threx corrected, and there was an edge under the words now, the patience of someone who did not like being summarized so plainly. "If your species is truly as resilient as the stories say, you should have nothing to fear from 3 cadets in a friendly exercise." Fen Oruk shifted his weight, glancing toward the dormitory windows as if hoping a teacher would appear, and end this before it began. No one did. I stood up slowly. Not because I needed to think about it. I already knew how this would go. I stood slowly, because rushing would have told them something about me that I was not ready to give away yet. "If I say no," I said, "you will tell everyone I refused because I was afraid. If I say yes, and something happens to one of you, I will be the one standing in front of a review board tomorrow. That is not a fair exercise. That is a trap dressed up as curiosity." "Then think of it as a chance to prove them all wrong," Dorel said, and something about the way he said it made it clear he expected me to lose, and wanted witnesses for it. Behind them, a few other cadets had begun to gather near the dormitory steps, drawn by the sight of a crowd forming where no crowd should be. I recognized some of the faces. A pale, sharp-eyed cadet from the Northern Academy block was already recording on his wrist unit. Word would travel fast either way. I thought about walking away. I really did consider it, for the length of one slow breath. Walking away would have been the easier story to live with. It would not have made headlines in the cadet channels. It would not have made anyone afraid of me. But there was something in the way Threx rolled his shoulders, testing his own balance, that told me walking away would not end this. It would only delay it. And next time there might not be 3 of them standing in the open where everyone could see what happened. "Fine," I said. "Before the bell. No weapons, no augments. First fall ends it. Agreed?" Threx's smile widened. "Agreed." Dorel nodded once, already stepping back to give us room, already lifting his slate to record data as if this were nothing more than a laboratory exercise. Fen Oruk did not move at all. He just watched me with an expression I could not quite read, somewhere between curiosity and worry. The small crowd near the dormitory steps had grown to maybe a dozen cadets now, murmuring among themselves, several species mixed together, antennae twitching, eyes narrowing, all of them waiting to see the human girl from the sealed world finally show her cards. I rolled my neck once, feeling the familiar tightness settle out of it, and looked at Threx Vaughn directly for the first time since he had blocked my light. "You should know something before we start," I said quietly, so only the 3 of them could hear. "And what is that?" Threx said, still smiling. "Where I grew up, there was no such thing as a fair exercise. There was only surviving the next 5 minutes, and then the 5 minutes after that. I did not learn how to fight for points. I learned how to fight because the ground itself wanted me dead, and it was patient, and it was clever, and it never once gave me the chance to say the words 'first fall ends it.'" For just a moment, something flickered behind Threx's confidence, a small crack in the certainty he had walked in with. Then he laughed it off, glancing back at Darrell, as if sharing a private joke about dramatic humans and their stories. "Very poetic," he said. "Shall we begin?" I did not answer him with words. The eastern sky had gone the color of pale honey by then, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it really was. Somewhere above us, in the bell tower at the far end of the yard, gears were beginning to turn, slow and mechanical, counting down toward the first ring of the morning bell. Threx dropped into a stance his people used in formal duels, weight balanced, hands open, the kind of stance built for a fight with rules, with judges, with a clear beginning and a clear end. Darrell stayed several steps back, slate raised, already narrating measurements under his breath, like this was still just an experiment he could control. Fen Oruk stood off to the side, closer to me than to either of his companions, and I noticed that detail even then, though I did not understand yet what it meant. The crowd near the dormitory steps had gone quiet. Even the cadet recording on his wrist unit seemed to be holding his breath. I did not move into any stance at all. I simply stood there, arms loose at my sides, watching the way Threx's eyes tracked me, the way his weight shifted a fraction, before every decision he made, the way Darrell's slate blinked with numbers that meant nothing about what was actually happening in front of him. They had read my file. They had seen the low numbers on strength, on speed, on every measurement that fit neatly into a chart. What none of those numbers could show them was the thing my homeworld had actually taught me, the thing that had nothing to do with how hard I could hit or how fast I could move. It had taught me when to wait. The bell tower gears clicked again, closer now to the hour, and somewhere across the yard a flock of small gray birds lifted off the roofline all at once, startled by nothing anyone could see. Threx's eyes flicked toward the sound for less than a heartbeat. Less than a heartbeat was more than enough. I moved. The crowd near the steps would later argue about exactly what happened next, because it happened too fast for most of them to follow clearly, and because everyone who watched it seemed to remember a slightly different version of those few seconds. But there was one thing every single witness agreed on afterward, without exception, no matter how they described the rest. None of it took very long at all. Threx Vaughn was still shifting his weight to recover from that half-second of distraction when I closed the distance between us. His formal stance, built for judges and rules and clear beginnings, had no answer for someone who refused to follow the shape of a duel. I was inside his guard before he finished resetting his balance, and the fight that he had walked in expecting to have simply did not happen the way he had planned it. Darrell Kesh dropped his slate somewhere in those first 2 seconds, the little device clattering onto the packed dirt, forgotten mid-sentence, his careful narration of measurements cut off in the middle of a word. He had spent so much time studying numbers that he had never once considered what it would look like when the numbers stopped mattering. Fen Oruk, to his credit, was the only one of the three who tried to react at all. He shifted his stance a half-second before it would have helped him, which told me he had faster instincts than either of his companions, even if those instincts came a fraction too late. The bell tower gears reached the top of the hour, and in the space between one breath and the next, before that first ring ever sounded across the yard, all three of them were already on the ground. I stood in the middle of the yard, breathing evenly, my hands still open at my sides, exactly as they had been before I moved. The morning light had shifted from pale honey to something closer to gold, and the small gray birds had settled back onto the rooftops, as if nothing at all had happened. Threx lay where he had fallen, staring up at the sky, with an expression that had nothing left of the confidence he had walked in with. Darrell was pushing himself up onto one elbow, his slate lying face down a few steps away, its screen still glowing uselessly with numbers no one was watching anymore. Fen Oruk was the first to sit up fully, and when his eyes found mine, there was no anger in them at all. Only something that looked very much like understanding. The bell rang. The sound rolled out across the yard, clean and steady, the same as it did every single morning, calling every cadet on the grounds toward the start of another ordinary day. Around us, the small crowd that had gathered stood frozen in place, no one quite sure what to say, no one quite ready to look away. I bent down, picked up Darrell's fallen slate, and held it out to him without a word. He took it with a hand that was not entirely steady, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything at all. "You said humans were listed lowest in this cohort," I finally said, my voice quiet, almost gentle. "Maybe your charts are measuring the wrong things." Somewhere behind me, I heard someone in the crowd whisper a question that I suspected would follow me for a very long time after that morning. "What is she?" I did not turn around to answer it. I simply walked toward the dormitory steps, past the small crowd that parted to let me through, past the sound of the second bell beginning to ring across the academy grounds, carrying every cadet forward into the day, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But everyone who had been standing in that yard knew better, and by the time morning drills began, the story of what had happened before the bell rang was already spreading through every corridor of the academy, growing a little larger and a little stranger with every cadet who repeated it. I had wanted, more than almost anything, to keep my past exactly where it was, sealed, quiet, mine alone. That morning, standing in the golden light with 3 cadets picking themselves up off the ground around me, I understood with complete certainty that this was no longer possible. The questions were only just beginning. By the time I reached the mess hall for the midday meal, every single table had heard some version of what happened in the yard. I sat alone near the far window, the way I usually did, with a tray of food I had no real appetite for. Liam Carter, one of the few cadets who had never once asked me about my homeworld, dropped into the seat across from me without asking permission. "So," he said, stabbing at his food with a fork, not looking up. 3 cadets, before the bell. "That true?" "It is true," I said. "You hurt them?" "No," I said, and I meant it. "They will be sore for a day, maybe 2. Nothing that will not heal on its own." Liam nodded slowly, chewing, thinking it over the way he thought over everything, careful and unhurried. He had a plain, steady kind of face, the sort of face that did not show much no matter what was happening around it, and I had always liked that about him. He did not stare at me the way half the academy seemed to be staring at me now. "They started it," he said finally. It was not a question either. "They did. Then I do not see the problem." He glanced up at me for the first time since sitting down. "Word is Colonel Wallace wants to see you before evening drills." My stomach tightened slightly, though I kept my face as calm as his. "Of course he does." "For what it is worth," Liam said, going back to his food. "Half the cadets in this hall think you are a hero. The other half think you are something to be afraid of. Nobody in here thinks you are ordinary anymore. Not after this morning." "I never wanted to be extraordinary," I said quietly. "I wanted to be left alone." Liam did not answer that, because there was nothing useful to say to it, and he seemed to understand that better than most people did. We ate the rest of the meal mostly in silence, while around us, the low hum of conversation kept circling back to the same 3 names, over and over, spoken in tones that ranged from awe to unease. Colonel Grant Wallace's office sat at the top of the administration building, with a wide window that looked out over the training yard, where the whole thing had started. When I walked in that evening, he was standing at that window, with his hands folded behind his back, watching a group of first-year cadets running drills below. "Sit," he said, without turning around. I sat. He let the silence stretch for a while, before he finally turned to face me, and when he did, his expression was not what I had expected. There was no anger in it. Mostly, there was something closer to tired concern. "3 formal complaints landed on my desk today," he said. "One from Threx Vaughn, though it reads less like a complaint and more like an attempt to save face. One from Darrell Kesh, who seems more interested in requesting access to your medical file than in disciplining you. And one, oddly enough, was withdrawn before it was even fully submitted. Fen Oruk changed his mind halfway through writing it." "I did not ask for a fight," I said. "They cornered me before the bell. There are witnesses." "I know," Wallace said. "I have already reviewed the footage from the perimeter cameras. You did not throw the first strike. You barely threw anything I would call a strike at all." He paused, studying me carefully. "What you did throw was very, very fast." I said nothing. "I am not going to discipline you," he continued, moving to sit on the edge of his desk rather than behind it, which struck me as a small, deliberate choice, an attempt to seem less like an authority and more like someone simply having a conversation. "Officially, this incident will be recorded as an unauthorized sparring exercise. Mutual fault, no lasting harm, closed. That is the version that goes into the record." "And unofficially?" I asked. Wallace was quiet for a moment, choosing his next words with obvious care. "Unofficially, I have spent 30 years in this academy, training cadets from every corner of known space, and I have never once seen anyone move the way 3 separate witnesses described you moving this morning. Nobody moves that fast against 3 opponents, unless something taught them to. I looked down at my hands, folded in my lap. Something did. Your homeworld, he said. It was not a question, but it was gentler than the way Darrell had asked it that morning. My homeworld, I confirmed. The file is sealed above my clearance, Wallace said. I do not know what happened there, and I am not asking you to tell me now, in this office, on command. But I want you to understand something, and I want you to actually hear it, not just nod along the way. Cadets usually do when an officer lectures them. I looked up and met his eyes. Word of this morning is already spreading past this academy, he said. Not just among cadets. Instructors are talking. Command staff are talking. There will be people, in the days and weeks ahead, who see what happened in that yard, and decide they want to test you themselves, the same way Threx and Darrell did. Some of them will be curious. Some of them will be worried. And some of them, I am sorry to say, will see an opportunity, a chance, to make a name for themselves by being the one who finally beats the Deathworld girl. I did not choose that name, I said quietly. I know you did not, Wallace said, but you are going to have to decide how you carry it, because it is not going away now. Not after today. I sat with that for a long moment, listening to the faint sound of drill instructors shouting orders somewhere below the window, the ordinary rhythm of academy life continuing on exactly as it had before, even though something inside my own life had just shifted permanently out of place. What would you have me do differently? I asked. Let them corner me every time? Pretend to lose so nobody feels threatened? No, Wallace said, and there was something firm in the word, something that told me he meant it completely. I would never ask a cadet to pretend to be weaker than they are. That is a dangerous habit to build, and it rarely ends well for the person carrying it. What I am asking is something different. I am asking you to think carefully about restraint, not because you did anything wrong today, but because the next challenge might come from someone less foolish than Threx Vaughn, someone who plans instead of postures, and I would rather you walk into that situation with a clear head than a defensive one. I thought about Darrell's slate, forgotten on the ground, still glowing with numbers that had meant nothing in the end. I thought about the look on Fen Oruk's face after he sat up, the absence of anger, the presence of something closer to respect. I held back this morning, I said quietly, more than they realized, more than most people here would guess, looking at what happened. Wallace studied me for a long moment. How much more? I did not answer that directly. Some things were not meant to be spoken aloud in an office, with a wide window, overlooking a training yard, full of first-year cadets, who still believed the worst thing that could happen to them was a failing grade. Enough, I said finally. Enough that nobody in that yard this morning was ever in real danger. That was the point. I needed them to understand something, without anyone getting hurt in the process. And did they understand it? Wallace asked. I thought about it honestly before I answered. 2 of them understood something. I am not sure yet what Threx understood, beyond the fact that his pride took a hit in front of an audience. Pride like his does not always learn the right lesson from a fall. Wallace nodded slowly, as if that matched something he already suspected. Keep an eye on him then. Pride that gets bruised in public tends to look for a way to even the score, and it rarely chooses a fair method for doing it. I intend to, I said. He stood up from the edge of his desk, walked back to the window, and looked down at the yard again, watching the first-year cadets finish their drills and begin filing back toward the dormitories, in loose, chattering lines. You are dismissed, he said, without turning around. Get some rest. Tomorrow will bring more questions than today did, and you will need a clear head to answer them, even the ones people do not ask out loud. I stood, straightened my uniform out of habit rather than necessity, and walked toward the door. One more thing, Wallace said, just as my hand touched the handle. I paused, looking back. For what it is worth, he said, still facing the window, I do not think you are something to be afraid of. I think you are something this academy has never quite known how to measure, and that is a very different thing, even if it does not always feel that way to the people around you. I did not have an answer for that, so I simply nodded, though he could not see it, and stepped out into the corridor. The hallway outside his office was empty at that hour, lit by the soft amber glow of the evening lighting cycle. and I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to, listening to the quiet hum of the building settling into night. Behind every door I passed on the way back to my quarters, I could hear fragments of conversation drifting through the walls. Cadets from a dozen different worlds discussing the same morning, the same 3 names, the same unanswered question that seemed to be following me everywhere now. What is she? I reached my own quarters, closed the door behind me, and stood alone in the dim light for a long time, before I finally sat down on the edge of my bed. Colonel Wallace was right about one thing. Tomorrow would bring more questions. I could already feel it building, the way pressure builds in the air before a storm, a stillness that promised something was coming, something bigger than 3 cadets and an empty training yard. I did not know yet exactly what shape that storm would take, but I knew, with the same certainty my homeworld had once used to teach me when danger was near, that it was already on its way. And for the first time since arriving at this academy, I found myself wondering whether hiding my past had ever really protected me at all, or whether it had only delayed the moment when I would finally have to stand in the open and let everyone see exactly what had made me the way I was. Sleep did not come easily that night, and when it finally did, it did not bring rest. It brought memory instead, the way it always did, whenever the walls I kept around my past began to crack even slightly. I was 7 years old the first time I understood that the ground beneath my feet was not simply ground. My mother had knelt beside me in the tall red grass outside our settlement, her hand pressed flat against my chest to keep me still, her eyes fixed on a patch of soil no different, to my young eyes, from any other patch of soil around it. "Do not move," she had whispered, "not even to breathe too loudly." I remember the way the grass swayed without wind, a slow rippling motion that moved against the direction the breeze should have carried it, and I remember the way my mother's grip tightened on my shoulder, as we watched a burrowing strand beneath the surface track the vibration of something small and unlucky several meters away. The ground itself seemed to inhale, and then a moment later, the unlucky creature was gone, pulled under without so much as a sound. "The soil listens," my mother told me afterward, once we were safely back inside the settlement fence. "It listens for weight, for rhythm, for anything that moves without knowing how to move quietly. You will learn to walk like the wind instead, light, uneven, never the same pattern twice." That was one of my first lessons. There were hundreds more after it, spread across years that most children on gentler worlds would have spent learning games and songs instead. I learned which plants released a fine dust that could blind a person within seconds if the wind shifted wrong. I learned to recognize the particular stillness in the air that came before a pressure storm, the kind of storm that could strip skin in under a minute if you were caught outside without shelter. I learned that predators on my world did not always announce themselves with sound or size. Some of the deadliest things I ever encountered were smaller than my hand, patient enough to wait for hours without moving, and clever enough to mimic the exact texture of stone. My father used to say that our world did not hate us. He said hatred required attention, and our world paid us no attention at all. It simply existed, following its own rules, indifferent to whether we survived those rules or not. That indifference, he said, was somehow worse than hatred would have been. Hatred could be reasoned with, in theory. Indifference could not. The world would go on exactly the same whether we lived or died, and it would not notice the difference either way. I grew up inside that indifference, learning its shape the way other children learn to read. By the time I was 10, I could identify 11 different predator calls, each one signaling a different response, some meaning run, some meaning freeze, some meaning climb, and one meaning something so specific and so dangerous that there was no time to think about it at all, only time to act on instinct that had been drilled into muscle and bone since before I could properly speak. I remember the settlement gathering each evening around a central fire, not for comfort, though comfort came with it, but because gathering together in a lit, watched space was one of the few genuine defenses we had against the things that hunted after dark. Children were taught to sleep in shifts within family units, someone always awake, always listening, because the creatures that hunted at night had learned, over generations, that humans slept in patterns predictable enough to exploit if no one was paying attention. I remember losing people. That is the part I do not like to think about, even now, sitting in the quiet of my academy quarters, light years away from that world. I remember a boy named Callum, 3 years older than me, who taught me how to climb the thorn trees fast enough to escape ground predators, and who did not make it home himself one evening, when a storm rolled in faster than anyone predicted. I remember a woman named Elspeth, who ran the settlement's small medical station, and who died not from any predator or storm, but from an infection that would have been treated easily on almost any other world in known space, if only we had the resources that other worlds took for granted. We did not have easy access to advanced medicine. We did not have automated defenses or orbital support, or the comfortable safety nets that cadets from softer worlds seemed to assume were simply part of how civilization worked. We had each other, and we had the lessons passed down from those who had survived long enough to teach them, and we had an unshakable understanding that the universe owed us nothing at all. That understanding, more than any single skill I learned, was what truly shaped me. I remember the day my mother first let me carry a full watch shift alone, standing at the edge of the settlement fence as the sun went down, responsible for noticing anything that moved wrong in the deepening shadows. I was 12 years old. I remember how quiet the world became at dusk, not a peaceful quiet, but a waiting quiet, the kind that made every sense sharpen without conscious effort. I remember standing there for 6 hours, utterly still, utterly alert, and feeling for the first time a strange, fierce pride in my own ability to simply endure. That pride never left me, even after everything changed. The Academy recruiters found our world during what they called an outreach expansion, searching remote systems for populations that might benefit from integration into the wider galactic community. I remember the day their shuttle landed outside our settlement fence, sleek and impossibly clean against the red dust and thorn trees, and I remember the recruiters stepping out in suits that looked far too thin for our world's environment, unaware of how close they had come to walking directly into a predator's territory during their approach. My mother met them at the gate. I stood beside her, 13 years old by then, already taller than most children my age on other worlds, already carrying scars along my forearms from thorn tree climbs and a burrowing strand encounter that had come far too close. The recruiters spoke of opportunity, of education, of a chance for our settlement's children to see worlds beyond our own, worlds with resources and safety nets and medicine that could have saved Elspeth, worlds where storms did not strip skin and soil did not listen for footsteps. My mother listened to all of it with an expression I could not quite read, somewhere between hope and grief. Some of the children may go, she told them finally. Not all of them will want to, and those who do go must understand something before they leave. Where you are taking them, they will be strange. They will be too strong for gentle games, too alert for calm rooms, too quiet for polite conversation. Do not mistake this for a flaw. It is the only reason any of them are alive to accept your offer at all. I remember those words exactly, because I turned them over and over in my mind during the long transport flight that eventually carried me away from everything I had ever known, toward an academy built for cadets who had never once had to listen to soil for the sound of something moving beneath it. I remember the first night in academy quarters, lying in a bed softer than anything I had ever slept on, in a room with locked doors and automated environmental controls, and absolutely nothing that needed watching through the dark hours. I remember lying awake anyway, every sense sharpened out of habit, waiting for a threat that never came, because there was nothing on this world, inside this building, that wanted anything from me at all. It took me nearly a year to learn how to sleep through an entire night without waking at every small sound. It took me longer than that to learn how to sit in a crowded room without automatically calculating every exit, every potential threat, every possible reason someone's movement might mean danger instead of simple conversation. The other cadets, from worlds gentler than mine, moved through their days with an ease that sometimes struck me as almost careless, though I understood, with time, that it was not carelessness at all. It was simply the absence of a lifetime spent assuming the worst. Their worlds had taught them that most things were safe until proven otherwise. My world had taught me the opposite, and unlearning that instinct, even partially, took more effort than any physical drill the Academy ever assigned me. I did not tell my classmates about any of this, not in those early months, not for a long time afterward either. Partly because the details of my homeworld were kept sealed above most clearance levels, a decision made by command staff who worried, I suspected, about exactly the kind of reaction Threx and Durrell eventually had, cadets treating Deathworld survivors as either weapons to study or threats to fear. But mostly, I kept quiet, because the memories were mine, and I was not ready to hand them over to people who had never once had to listen to the ground for danger. I thought, sometimes, about Callum, who never got the chance to leave our world at all. I thought about Elspeth, who deserved a medical station with resources instead of one built from whatever supplies our settlement could scavenge and trade for. I thought about my mother, still standing watch at that fence every evening, still teaching the next generation of children how to walk light and uneven so the soil would not learn their rhythm. I had come to this academy carrying all of that inside me, folded up small and quiet, tucked behind a calm face and unremarkable rankings on charts that measured the wrong things entirely. And then 3 cadets had cornered me before the bell, wanting to test a story they did not understand, and something folded up so carefully for so long had finally, briefly, come open. Lying in my quarters that night, replaying the memory of my mother's hand pressed flat against my chest in the tall red grass, I understood something with sudden, uncomfortable clarity. I had spent years learning to hide what my world had made me into, believing that hiding it was the same as protecting it, the same as protecting myself from being seen as strange, or dangerous, or simply too different to belong among cadets who had never once had to fight for their next breath. But hiding was not the same as protecting. Hiding was simply a different kind of loneliness, one I had chosen for myself, without ever fully realizing what it cost me. Somewhere outside my window, the academy grounds had gone quiet for the night, lit only by soft security lighting along the walking paths, patrolled by systems that would notice anything out of place long before any threat could reach a single sleeping cadet. It was, by every measure my homeworld had ever taught me, an impossibly safe place to rest. And yet I lay awake for a long while longer, thinking about the look on Fen'Oruk's face after he had picked himself up off the ground that morning, the absence of anger, the presence of something that looked almost like understanding, almost like the beginning of a question he had not yet found the courage to ask out loud. I wondered, drifting finally toward sleep, whether he might be the first person at this academy I would ever choose to answer honestly. The days that followed moved faster than I expected, and none of them moved quietly. By the second morning, the story of the yard had spread far beyond the cadet corps and into the instructor lounges, and by the third, I noticed officers I had never spoken to before watching me across the mess hall, with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open evaluation, as if I had suddenly become a subject worth studying, rather than simply another cadet working through the same schedule as everyone else. Darrell Kesh approached me first, 2 days after the incident, catching me alone near the library archive during a free study period. I expected another argument, another attempt to extract data from a situation he still could not fully explain. Instead, he stood a careful distance away, hands folded behind his back, and spoke with none of the certainty he had carried in the yard. "I have reviewed the footage 11 times, he said. "I still cannot fully account for what I observed." "You are not the only one," I said. "My species values precision," Darrell continued, choosing his words slowly, as if each one had to pass through some internal filter before he allowed it out. "We are taught from an early age that anything can be measured, given the correct instruments and enough patience. I approached you believing your capabilities could be quantified the same way I quantify everything else. I was wrong to assume that, and I was wrong to treat you as a data point rather than a person." I studied him for a long moment, surprised by the honesty in it, though I kept my expression neutral. "That is a fair thing to admit. I would like to understand," he said, "not to test you again, but simply to understand, if you would ever be willing to explain, in your own time, in your own way." I thought about my mother's words to the recruiters, about children who would seem too strong for gentle games, too alert for calm rooms. I thought about how long I had kept those truths sealed away, believing silence was the safest choice. "Perhaps," I said. "Not today, but perhaps." Darrell nodded, seeming to accept that answer more easily than I expected, and left without pressing further, which told me something had genuinely shifted in how he saw the situation, even if he did not yet have the full picture. Fen'Oruk approached differently, and sooner. He found me the very same evening as the incident, waiting near the training yard entrance after drills had ended, looking younger and less certain than he had standing beside Threx and Darrell that morning. "I withdrew my complaint," he said, before I had even fully registered his presence. "I heard. I do not think what we did was right, he continued, the words coming faster now, as if he had been rehearsing them, and needed to get through all of it, before his nerve gave out. I went along with it because Threx and Darrell are senior to me in rank, and because I did not want to seem weak in front of them. But standing there, watching what actually happened, I understood that we were the ones being tested, not you. And we failed something important, though I am still working out exactly what. You tried to react, I said, faster than the other two. That counts for something. Fen blinked, surprised that I had noticed such a small detail in the middle of everything else that happened. It was not fast enough. No, I agreed. But it told me you were paying attention to something other than pride. That is rare, in my experience. He was quiet for a moment, studying the ground between us. I would like to train properly, if you would ever consider it. Not to test you again, just to learn. Whatever you would be willing to teach. I thought about Callum, patiently showing me how to climb the thorn trees fast enough to escape the ground, passing down knowledge that had eventually saved my life more times than I could count, even after he himself was gone. I thought about how much of what I knew existed only in me now, unshared, unspoken, sealed away with everything else from my homeworld. Perhaps, I said again, and this time the word felt lighter than it had with Darrell, easier to imagine following through on. Threx Vaughn did not approach me at all in those first days. I heard, through the usual channels of cadet gossip that seemed to reach every corner of the academy within hours, that he had requested a formal review of the incident, framing it not as a loss, but as a demonstration of unfair advantage, arguing that my unspecified capabilities amounted to an undisclosed augmentation that should have disqualified me from any sparring exercise involving standard cadets. Colonel Wallace summoned me to his office again on the fourth day, though this time his expression carried more weight than concern. Threx Vaughn has escalated his complaint to the Academy Oversight Board, Wallace said, without preamble. He is requesting a formal evaluation, not disciplinary, evaluative. He wants your physical capabilities officially tested and documented, under the argument that unmeasured advantages present a safety risk to standard cadets. That is not why he is doing this, I said quietly. I know that, Wallace said. You know that. Half the Academy suspects it too. But the board has to take the request seriously, regardless of his motives. Because if he is right, even partially, it does raise a legitimate question about training safety going forward. And if he is wrong, a formal evaluation would settle the matter clearly enough that this kind of challenge should not happen again. Should not, I repeated, but might. There is always the possibility, Wallace admitted. Reputation moves faster than policy. Some cadets will hear about a formal evaluation and see it as an opportunity rather than a resolution. I sat with that for a long moment, looking out the same window where I had stood only days earlier, watching first-year cadets running drills that now felt like they belonged to a much simpler version of my life at this academy. What would this evaluation involve? I asked. A supervised assessment, Wallace said, conducted by senior instructors, with proper safety protocols in place, likely against carefully selected opponents, rather than an open challenge. It would be recorded, reviewed by the Oversight Board, and the results would become part of the official Academy record, closing the matter definitively either way. And if I refuse? Wallace considered the question carefully before answering. You have that right. Cadets cannot be compelled into evaluations they have not consented to, especially given the sealed nature of your file. But I will tell you honestly, the story will not simply fade away if you decline. It will keep circulating, growing less accurate with every retelling, until eventually the version people believe bears no resemblance to what actually happened in that yard. An open evaluation, conducted properly, might be the only way to replace speculation with something closer to truth. I thought about my mother again, about her warning to the recruiters all those years ago. They will be strange. Do not mistake this for a flaw. I thought about Fen Oruk's honest question, about Darrell's careful admission that his instruments had failed him, about the difference between being feared and being understood. I will consent, I said finally. On one condition. Name it. I choose how much of myself to show, I said. Not the Oversight Board, not Threx Vaughn. Me. Whatever this evaluation reveals, it will be on my terms, not as a performance for anyone's satisfaction. Wallace studied me for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, something that looked almost like respect settling into place. "That seems entirely fair," he said. "I will inform the board." Word of the upcoming evaluation spread through the academy even faster than the original incident had, and in the days leading up to it, I noticed a strange shift in how cadets around me behaved. Some kept their distance, uncertain how to act around someone who might soon be officially confirmed as something beyond ordinary. Others sought me out deliberately, asking careful questions, offering awkward encouragement, treating the upcoming evaluation like a spectacle, rather than the quiet resolution I had hoped it would be. Liam remained steady through all of it, sitting across from me at meals exactly as he always had, treating the whole situation with the same unhurried practicality he brought to everything else. "You nervous?" he asked, 3 days before the scheduled evaluation, not looking up from his food. "A little," I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty of it. "About losing, or about winning?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. "About being seen clearly for the first time since I got here. That is a different kind of nervous than either of those." Liam nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense to him, and did not push for more, which I appreciated more than I found easy to say aloud. Captain Owen Blake sought me out the evening before the evaluation, someone I had exchanged only a handful of words with in all my time at the academy, a quiet instructor who oversaw advanced tactics courses and rarely involved himself in cadet affairs beyond his classroom. He found me on the walking path near the dormitories, falling into step beside me without announcing his intentions. "I grew up on a world not unlike yours," he said, after a long stretch of comfortable silence. "Different dangers, same fundamental lesson. The universe does not owe anyone safety, and those of us who learn that lesson early tend to carry it differently than those who never have to." I glanced at him, surprised. "I did not know that." "Not many do," Blake said. "I stopped mentioning it years ago, for reasons I suspect you already understand." He paused, watching the evening light fade over the training yard in the distance. "Tomorrow, people are going to see something about you they have never seen before. Some of them will be amazed. Some of them will be afraid. A few, I imagine, will try to find ways to use what they see for their own purposes, whether that means recruitment, or advantage, or simple curiosity dressed up as concern." "That is not a comforting thought," I said. "It is not meant to be comforting," Blake said. "It is meant to be honest. What I want you to understand is that none of those reactions have to define how you see yourself. You survived a world that offered no mercy, and asked no permission before testing you. Whatever happens tomorrow, in front of instructors and oversight boards and an audience of curious cadets, it will be a far gentler test than anything your homeworld ever put you through. You do not need to fear it." I thought about that for a long moment, letting the words settle somewhere deeper than simple reassurance usually reached. "Thank you," I said finally. Blake nodded once, satisfied, and turned to walk back toward the instructor quarters, leaving me alone on the path as the evening light finally gave way to the soft glow of security lighting along the academy grounds. Tomorrow, I understood, would not simply be another evaluation, another chart, another set of numbers meant to measure something that had never truly fit into measurement at all. Tomorrow, for the first time since arriving at this academy, I would choose to let myself be fully seen. The evaluation was scheduled for the same training yard where everything had started, though by the time I arrived that morning, it looked nothing like the quiet, empty space I remembered from before the bell rang that first day. Rows of seating had been arranged along one side, filled already with instructors, oversight board members, and a wide mix of cadets who had requested permission to observe. Recording equipment stood mounted at several angles, ensuring nothing about the assessment would be left to rumor or memory alone. Colonel Wallace stood near the center of the yard, speaking quietly with 2 other senior officers I did not recognize, while Captain Blake sat near the front row, his expression calm and unreadable. I saw Threx Vaughn seated among the observers, arms folded, his posture rigid in a way that suggested he was less certain of the outcome than his complaint had implied. Darrell Kesh sat nearby, slate in hand once again, though this time he glanced toward me with something closer to genuine curiosity than clinical detachment. Fen Oruk stood near the edge of the yard rather than sitting among the crowd, close enough to the action that I understood, without needing to ask, that he had requested to serve as one of my evaluation partners. Liam caught my eye from the back row and offered a small, steady nod, the kind of gesture that needed no words attached to it. Colonel Wallace called the yard to order, and the low murmur of conversation faded into attentive silence. This evaluation has been requested to formally assess and document capabilities that were demonstrated, unofficially, several days ago, Wallace announced, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. It will be conducted under full safety protocols, supervised directly by myself and Captain Blake, and recorded for review by the Academy Oversight Board. The cadet under evaluation has agreed to participate on the condition that she retains full discretion over the extent of her demonstration. That condition has been accepted by the board. A ripple of quiet reaction passed through the observers at that, some surprised, some clearly displeased, though none voiced open objection. Cadet Fen Oruk has volunteered as the first evaluation partner, Wallace continued, followed by a supervised team exercise involving 3 additional cadets selected by the instructor panel, concluding with a final assessment against Captain Blake himself, should all parties agree it remains appropriate to proceed that far. I stepped into the center of the yard, the same packed dirt beneath my boots that had witnessed the very beginning of all this, and found myself, strangely, more settled than I had expected to feel. The nervousness Liam had asked about at dinner 3 nights earlier had quieted somewhere between then and now, replaced by something calmer, more familiar, closer to the steady alertness my homeworld had trained into me so many years ago. Fen Oruk stepped forward to meet me, his expression serious but without any trace of the arrogance he had carried the first time we stood across from each other in this same yard. "I want you to know," he said quietly, just between the two of us, "that I am not trying to prove anything this time. I just want to actually learn something." "Then that is exactly what we will do," I said. The exercise that followed bore little resemblance to the brief, decisive encounter from days earlier. This time, I did not simply end things in a heartbeat. I moved with him, slower than I was capable of, showing him openings, correcting his stance mid-motion, letting him feel the shape of proper defense, rather than simply falling to a technique he could not follow closely enough to understand. Several times I let him press an advantage he had actually earned through good instinct, only guiding him back when his balance would have failed him against a real threat. By the end of it, Fen Oruk was breathing hard, sweat along his brow, but there was something bright in his expression that had nothing to do with victory or defeat. "That was completely different from before," he said, half laughing, half amazed. "Before, I was ending a threat," I said. "Today, I am teaching a student. Those are not the same thing at all, even if they can look similar from the outside." A quiet murmur of understanding passed through the observing crowd, and I noticed several instructors exchanging glances, recalculating something in their assumptions. The team exercise came next. 3 cadets selected by the instructor panel specifically for their strength, speed, and tactical training, none of them connected to the original incident, chosen deliberately to remove any question of personal grievance from the assessment. This time, under full supervision, with Wallace and Blake watching every movement closely, I allowed myself to move with more of my actual capability, though still well short of everything my homeworld had ever demanded of me in true survival. The 3 cadets worked well together, coordinating with genuine skill, testing angles and combinations that would have overwhelmed most opponents through sheer combined pressure. I found myself, for the first time in longer than I could remember, actually working to counter something, rather than simply ending it before it began. It was, in its own strange way, almost enjoyable, a controlled challenge instead of a desperate necessity, and by the time Wallace called the exercise to a close, all 3 cadets were still standing, breathing hard but uninjured, looking at me with expressions that had shifted somewhere between wariness and genuine respect. "Impressive," one of them said, extending a hand once the exercise formally ended. "That was actually difficult, and I mean that as a compliment." "It was meant to be difficult," I said, shaking her hand. "For both of us." Wallace conferred quietly with Blake and the other officers for a long moment, reviewing notes, exchanging low words I could not quite make out from where I stood. Finally, Wallace turned back toward the yard. "Given what has already been demonstrated," he announced, "the panel does not believe a final assessment against Captain Blake is necessary to complete this evaluation. The results observed today are more than sufficient to close this matter definitively." I glanced toward Blake, who offered a small, approving nod, and I understood, without needing further explanation, that this had likely been the plan from the beginning, a final test held in reserve only if genuinely needed, and made unnecessary by everything already shown. Wallace addressed the full yard then, his voice carrying the weight of something meant to be remembered clearly. This evaluation confirms what several witnesses already reported several days ago. Cadet capabilities demonstrated here today fall outside standard measurement charts currently used by this academy, not due to any augmentation or unfair advantage, but due to survival training received prior to enrollment, under conditions this academy does not currently have adequate instruments to properly assess. He paused, letting that settle across the observers before continuing. The Oversight Board will be recommending updated evaluation standards for cadets originating from classified or high-risk environments, ensuring future assessments account for training and experience that standard metrics fail to capture. This matter is now formally closed. A ripple of reaction moved through the crowd, quiet conversation breaking out in several different directions, though none of it carried the tension that had followed me through the previous days. Instead, what I noticed most was something closer to simple curiosity. Cadets and instructors alike beginning to ask genuine questions, rather than assuming answers based on incomplete rumors. Threx Vaughn rose from his seat near the back, and for a moment I thought he might simply leave without a word, exactly as he had avoided me in the days since the original incident. Instead, he crossed the yard toward me, stopping a respectful distance away, his posture stiff, but his expression carefully composed. "I filed my complaint believing you had gained some unfair advantage," he said, the words clearly difficult for him to offer. "I see now that the advantage was not unfair. It was simply earned through circumstances I did not understand, and did not take the time to ask about before I acted. I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I am not asking for your friendship," Threx continued, some of his old pride surfacing briefly. "But I will acknowledge, publicly and for the record, that my assumptions were incorrect, and that the manner in which I acted on them was unworthy of this academy. It was not a full apology, not exactly, but it was honest in its own way, and I found that I respected it more than I would have respected empty words offered simply to smooth things over." "That is enough," I said, "for now." Threx nodded once, something in his shoulders easing slightly, and returned to his seat without further comment. Durrell approached next, slate held loosely at his side, rather than raised for measurement. "I would still like to understand," he said. "Not to quantify you, simply to understand, the way one person tries to understand another." "I think that can be arranged," I said, and meant it fully this time. The crowd began to disperse slowly after that, conversations continuing, as cadets filed out of the yard, carrying with them a version of events that had finally settled closer to the truth than any rumor had managed in the days before. Liam waited near the yard entrance, falling into step beside me as I walked out. "Told you," he said simply. "Half the academy already thought you were a hero. Looks like the rest just caught up." "I never wanted to be a hero," I said. "I just wanted to stop hiding." "Seems like you managed both," Liam said, and there was something warm in the way he said it that made the words settle comfortably, somewhere I had not expected them to reach. Fen Orc caught up with us near the dormitory steps, still slightly out of breath from the earlier exercise, his expression bright with something that looked very much like the beginning of genuine friendship rather than simple curiosity. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "For actual training, I mean. If you are still willing." "Same time tomorrow," I agreed. That evening, standing alone at my window as the academy grounds settled into the quiet amber glow of the evening lighting cycle, I found myself thinking, one final time, about my mother's words to the recruiters all those years ago, standing at the settlement fence with the tall red grass swaying behind her. "They will be strange. Do not mistake this for a flaw. It is the only reason any of them are alive to accept your offer at all." I thought about Callum, who never got the chance to see a world like this one, safe and quiet and full of cadets who slept soundly through entire nights, without needing to listen for danger in the dark. I thought about Elspeth, and the medical station that could have saved her, had our world offered even a fraction of the resources this academy took for granted. And I thought, finally, about the bell that had rung across the training yard on that very first morning, marking the beginning of an ordinary day for every other cadet on the grounds. while 3 cadets picked themselves up off the dirt around me, forever changed by what they had witnessed in the handful of seconds before that sound reached them. Tomorrow, another bell would ring across this academy, calling cadets forward into another ordinary day. But I understood now, standing quietly at my window with the weight of my past finally set down instead of buried, that nothing about me would ever be fully ordinary again, and for the first time since arriving at this academy, that realization did not frighten me at all. It felt instead very much like the beginning of something I was finally ready to face in the open, exactly as my world had once taught me to face everything else.